All right. How we doing? Everybody all good?
So we are broadcasting, and I see that there's attendees that have joined, so we can begin whenever you're ready.
Good to go. Thank you very much. Okay. I'd like to call to order regular council meeting number 1521 for September 1st. And in honor of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. This meeting of council is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications in order to adhere to the provincial health officer's orders respecting physical distancing requirements as a measure to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. Pardon me. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the Village's website following the meeting. Members of the public who wish to ask questions during open question period at the end of the meeting will be able to do so, and I will provide instructions at that time. With that, are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. No delegations. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting number 1520 from July 28th. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? Seeing none, we also don't have a rise with a report or anything from the committee of the whole. So committee meetings, we have the minutes from the Mayor's Task Force, the second meeting and the third meeting as presented. Are there any questions? I mean, just to give a really quick rundown, talk about it in my Mayor's report, but just a really quick rundown. I mean, we've had 3 meetings in the month of August since we spoke last. We've split into some subcommittees to work on some big ideas and at the same time try to figure out how we could still work on other pressing issues and connect to the rest of the community. Everybody's really anxious to start moving some concrete moves and actions forward. The single biggest challenge is the fact that there's 11 people plus committee members plus staff. So getting everybody together is always everybody's keen to move ahead, but getting everybody together has been a real challenge. We have a meeting on September 10th. We're going to be doing it live at the community center in the Great Hall, right, Nikki? Yeah. So that'll be good, and hopefully we can start moving ahead on some actions that we could report back on. With that said, can somebody move the minutes from both those meetings?
I'll move them.
Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Office of the CAO. Duffy Lake concerns. Are there concerns on Duffy Lake?
Maybe a couple. So I have monthly meetings set up with RCMP. We just talk about maybe some similar issues we're working on and just provide updates to one another. And it was interesting because we had, in fact, I believe it was yourself, Mayor Richmond, who received some conversation, some feedback from the public about signage on the Duffy, in particular to advising that it is a mountain road, it is a dangerous road, and especially for motorcyclists to take heed on that road. Unbeknownst to us, at the same time, I understand that RCMP have written a letter. So sorry, I did actually write an email to Ministry of Transportation to see if they could get some signage up there. And I understand that there has been some signage. I haven't seen it myself. But the RCMP had also written a letter, and in particular, they were wanting to have some signage that advised all vehicles, whether or not you were a standard or an automatic or a large vehicle or a small vehicle, to gear down your vehicles, because they're seeing a lot of people coming down the bottom of the Duffy with no brakes or they're on fire. So they just are trying to get some information out and how to do that. So I suggested that it might be a good opportunity. We've worked positively with RCMP before, say, for example, for the crosswalk flasher at Signal Hill. That was definitely a joint initiative between us. We kept emailing and writing and trying to get that crosswalk flasher there. So I thought this might be something that we might want to do together with RCMP and sort of unite our forces on trying to get more awareness. I know signage is always so much, but do something together and try to get MOTI, Ministry of Transportation, involved with that. So I just wanted to bring that here for a conversation and just see what council's appetite was for that. And I'm happy to take that on with them.
Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
Yeah, so what I was curious about is it specifically based around the safety concerns of the highway in general? Or
More around educating people on what you should be doing to basically coming off. We haven't really gone through it all, but I mean, they do, Ministry of Transportation or Miller Capilano, they sweep the road. It's a mountain road. There's gravel on it quite quickly afterwards. They don't maintain it every day, and that shouldn't be expected. It is a mountain road. It's subject to changes in weather very quickly, but a lot of people don't really understand how technical this road can be. And we get a lot of people coming over that road, and how do we, I mean, potentially even involving the SLRD to see how we can get some messaging out, because this year has been particularly bad.
And I agree with you. I support your idea here for sure. My one suggestion, if the letter does come back to council for us to review, sorry, I should say, would a letter come back to council to review?
It depends. We might actually have something else before the letter. I'm not 100% sure how we'd necessarily move it forward, and I'm open to suggestions and ideas. Maybe it is just starting with a letter, but I think asking SLRD if they're wanting to be part of that as well. I mean, it runs right through part of Area C and Area D, basically, or A. Sorry, isn't it A? So. I haven't really worked my way all the way through it, but it has been such, we hear the sirens, we hear the stories, and I think it's time that we try and do something to advocate for some kind of, I don't know what, for that road.
I agree with you. I like the idea myself. I know one of the big concerns that I hear about a lot is just it's the backup of traffic behind the campers and people with trailers and stuff. So I think some signage for covering lots of different issues around that road would be helpful. So I would support your idea.
Thank you. Anything else from council? Councillor Craddock? You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Still on mute.
How's that?
You're good.
Good, thank you. You know, this has been ongoing for as long as you and I have both been on council. We've been trying to get signage on that road to advise people coming down towards Pemberton how tough it is, and the brake issue. We haven't had a lot of success with that over the years, but I think now there's way more traffic. There's more motorcycle traffic, and certainly with the gravel and being a narrow road, so many corners get covered with gravel right now. It's a real issue. We can't expect it to be cleaned every day. So there's certainly a certain amount of responsibility on anybody that drives that road to be careful. I know the bridge just north of, excuse me, Joffrey Lakes has got a terrible bump just as you do that 90-degree turn. And there's a number of places along the road, and I'm saying this as a motorcyclist, along the road where you can come right out of your seat on your motorcycle because of the bumps in the road that aren't marked. So I certainly think there's some issues that would be easily addressed if they wanted to. And I think over the years, it's been an issue. I mean, we've had the bridges replaced, but that road itself has never killed anybody. It's the people driving it that aren't paying attention to the conditions on the road. So I think any letter would help, but I'm not sure we're going to get a lot of support.
CEO Gilmer, do you want a motion from council to direct you to maybe coordinate with SLRD and I guess Leeward as well? I don't know. Is this a joint? Like, I don't want to slow it down. It's always one of those things where, you know, it's nice to join forces, but we also want to get this out. The summers are winding down.
Yeah.
Late, but nonetheless, I think it's still worthwhile.
Yeah, I think in preparation for spring as well, if we can work through to get, I don't think we're going to be able to achieve anything in short order for what's happening the rest of this year. But in my discussions with RCMP, it was at least if we can do something now for maybe during the winter and get something out there for the spring when the traffic starts back up again, that might be a target that we can look at.
Okay. So do you want a specific motion or do you have direction?
No, I think it's just, I wanted to just let you know that this was something I thought would be important for us to bring forward. And if you're good with me coordinating, I don't mind bringing an update, circulating a joint letter, something along those lines as we move forward.
Sounds good. Councillor Paddock.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to follow up, I'm wondering if up at the, before the 4 90-degree corners, if there can't be a flashing light that's on solar put up there, because that's the last opportunity people have to pay attention. And I see so many people leaving the Joffrey Lake area and riding their brakes all the way down to there. So I don't know, maybe we need some kind of flashing sign that just reminds motorists, if you've been riding your brakes, pull in here and cool off for 15 minutes. I don't know how you're going to get through to people.
Yeah, it's a tough one. People just, there are a lot of people driving roads that they've never driven anything similar to, right? So
yeah,
Some of these new cars, they don't know how to use the gears.
Mm-hmm.
I saw somebody with smoking brakes on the Duffy one time, and they asked if I could give them any advice, and I tried to explain how to use the gears. And he gave me a funny look. He's like, "Can you show me?" And he showed me in the car, and it wasn't numbers. There's no high, no low. It was, I had no clue either. It was a very modern car.
all right. Next up, UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund.
So we received a bit of an update earlier at our committee of the whole today from Mr. Clark from the Pembina Valley Dyking District. And as council may recall, we originally submitted under this program for 2 projects. One was for the Mittler-Lillooet Dike upgrades and the Arn Canal. And since that time, Mr. Clark has done some further analysis as actually directed by the funders and under the Dike Management Act, which would be the Inspector of Dikes. So it has appeared we've done some, the Diking District has done some drilling and some soil analysis on the dikes, and in addition to some of the right-of-way concerns that we talked about earlier today as well, it was deemed appropriate to drop the Miller-Lillooet until we're in a better position and have better numbers, to not proceed with that funding and just proceed with the Arn Canal culvert upgrades. And so we have been talking to UBCM and over the course of several months, and they were supportive of this approach as well. So what you're seeing here today is a resubmission under the grant funding we had previously applied for to just do the Arn Canal. The estimated cost of this project is $900,000, and this funding stream provides $750,000, and the Diking District will be putting up the remaining $150,000 for this project. It will be strictly run through the Diking District. We will support where we can. We'll also do the final claims, but we will be passing the funds along to them, similarly to what we've done in the past for them to manage this project. We actually have a memorandum of understanding as well that we signed when we started looking at applying for funds for the Diking District. As you may recall, they're not an eligible applicant under UBCM. So that's why the village and the SLRD and LUWAT have actually applied for projects for the Pembina Valley Diking District through this fund. So we're just looking, UBCM said we needed to have a new resolution to bring forward to resubmit for this application. And we did submit it. It was due on the 24th. We told them that we would be sending the resolution afterwards. So it's before council.
And they've been quite supportive of the change and reapplication.
Absolutely.
Any questions?
I'll move the motion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And last up is also UBCM Planning Program.
Yes. As you recall, at our last meeting, it was the last meeting before the break, there was a grant opportunity under the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Program for asset management. I won't finish the rest of that. It's a very long grant application name. So what this, we applied for 62,000, I think 500, something along those lines for funding. That left us about 11,500 for the village's contribution towards asset management and the project that we're moving ahead with. So this, in essence, would we wouldn't have to use community works gas tax funds. We could reserve those for some other initiatives in the future. And so this would be a matching grant, so the village wouldn't need to contribute anything. It's typical for UBCM to be that matching grant component. In fact, we need to actually submit our Federation of Canadian Municipalities grant application with this one, just so that they have it for their records. So what we're looking for today is a resolution to apply to UBCM's asset management planning program for an amount up to $12,000 to reduce the financial impact of the development on the asset management program.
Questions? Would like to make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
Councillor Sant, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
And then we're on to finance. So we're going to bring in Ms. Martin, I believe.
Yes.
So we'll give her a moment to set up. There she is. Hello, Ms. Martin.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
How are you? We're just waiting for you to set up and you give us a little presentation on the statement of financial information.
Yeah, I'll just be one moment. All right, so I'm here to present to Council the 2019 Statement of Financial Information for a review and approval. The Financial Information Act requires local governments to prepare a statement of financial information to be filed with the ministry following receipt of the audited financial statements. This SOFI report, Statement of Financial Information, includes our audited financials, schedule of payment to suppliers that we used over $25,000, schedule of remuneration and expenses for staff and council, staff over $75,000, and expenses that are incurred for staff training and tuition, etc. The SOFI has been prepared for the financial records of the village in accordance with the FIA and regulations, and requires us to present the SOFI to council for approval and to be made available to the public. So we are reporting this. The SOFI is being reported, being presented for consideration by council for approval before being filed. If we just want to go over a few key points of the SOFI, we can turn to page, I had the pages written down, let me just get there. So page 32 of the agenda shows our schedule of remuneration. So the schedule of remuneration shows the salaries and expenses for council, as well as staff over $75,000. And we have some reconciling items on the bottom. This SOFI report is a comparison between our financial statement balance and our T4 summary. So the reconciling balance differences on the bottom, the benefits are made up of municipal pension and extended health amounts. Then we have our WCB, EI, and CPP. And the other amounts are items that are not noted on the T4 summary, but are included in our financial summary. Something like our extended health tax, which is considered a benefit, but it's not noted on the T4 statement. And that makes up the majority of other. And then there's some smaller reconciling items for staff that are immaterial and not considered a taxable benefit, so they don't show on the T4 statement as well. And that would be items like boots for our public works department. And then there would be a small amount of timing in terms of invoices that would be paid on our financial statement but are not noted on our T4 summary. If we move to the next page, or sorry, to the page 34, this will show all trades that the Village of Pemberton used in 2019 that earned over $25,000 by working with us to deliver our services. And those are in alphabetical order. And then the next page would just show the reconciliation between our financial statement and our expenditures. Are there any questions?
Questions from council? All right then. Then I will need a motion to approve the 2019 Statement of Financial Information.
Yes.
Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Martin.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. So now we're going to wait for Ms. Pedrini and Mr. Chalmers to join us.
They're just connecting.
Perfect. Mr. Chalmers. Is Ms. Pedrini on her way, Haley? Do you know?
She's
I'll try reconnecting her.
in another office, so I'll just connect with her. Stand by. We're having some connection problems, so Ms. Petrini is going to join me in my office, and she'll sit here, and I will move.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, you guys. So we're looking at our new community amenity contribution policy. I will turn it over to Mr. Chalmers and Ms. Pedrini.
Thank you, Mayor Richmond, and good evening, Council. Yeah, the purpose of this report is to redeliver to Council a community amenity contribution policy that we drafted and presented to you in draft form back in June. And I'll speak to the policy in a little bit, but in June, Council endorsed the work that had been done and then asked for some additional information, namely a list of potential projects or amenity aspirations that they wanted to receive and presumably discuss a little further as things move forward, and then also to directing us to do some additional consultation with the development industry. So we've completed that work. You'll see in the staff report that's presented to you tonight that there's a summary of the development industry consultation, as well as a list of potential amenity projects that are attached. And just a couple of notes on those. Maybe I'll start with the project list. You know, certainly there's a number of sources that were pooled together in generating this list. And although it has a relationship to the community amenity policy, it is intended to be a list that exists larger than that and could be useful for grant funding opportunities or other sources of funding or other things. But there's definitely an interrelation between the two. But as we'll talk about in a second with the developer contributions or the developer comments, there's not a direct relationship in terms of project value cost distributed through the development industry. And Mr. Mayor, that was a very deliberative move on the part of staff as we move through the review of the amenity policy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. What we put together and what Council endorsed in June is really a framework for how we will go about determining and negotiating amenities. The provincial legislation does not bestow on amenities the same sort of framework that it does for things like development cost charges, where there's a very rigid process where you have to go through and list certain projects, estimate their cost, and justify a per unit or a per lot value based on development projections. That doesn't really exist in the legislation. And, you know, through an amalgam of experience here and in other places, you know, we came to realize that sometimes in smaller communities, there's other considerations that come with each development. And I think you may recall when we discussed it in June, you know, for example, we could have two very similar projects in the same neighborhood of the community, but one has a large servicing obligation that's required for it to work, but would benefit other people, and the other doesn't. And what we determined was that it would be best for the community amenity contribution policy to retain some flexibility to adapt to those changes that are really customary in a small town. And, you know, in my experience working throughout the province, there's kind of two structures for community amenity charges. Some of the large cities have either a percentage of lift that's expected. So when somebody rezones property and the value is created by the act of rezoning, in some places a proportion up to 75% of that is expected to flow back to the municipality. And in other cases, there's more of a definitional approach to the policy. And that seems to be predominantly what you see in smaller municipalities. And I think that's the primary reason. You know, my experience here and elsewhere would dictate that no two projects are alike, and certain projects have the potential to deliver benefits that might benefit the existing community as part of the requirement set for the project. So just turning to the policy, one of the key moves we made was to create three classes of consideration when we're discussing amenities. One is an outright community amenity. So that's something that the developer doesn't have to provide for any reason other than a willingness to enhance the community. The second is the one where we spend a lot of time in amenity negotiations in reality, which is the community benefits. And that might be upgrading a sewer line that will improve service to existing neighborhoods, or looping a water system to provide better fire flows, or sometimes it's a road upgrade, or those things that happen outside of what you can require under the act, but provide benefit not just to the project, but to the broader community. And we felt that there was a need to recognize some of those in our discussions about amenities. And then the third section, of course, is the requirements, and the act and your bylaws give you certain powers to make certain things requirements of any development. You know, it must connect to water, must connect to sewer, those sorts of things. So when we put those three buckets together, what we've done through the rest of the policy is tried to establish a framework for how we will go through negotiating. So the types of things that will be considered by definition and example. We've established council as the final arbiter of the amenity contribution and whether it's acceptable or not. Some of the information that we may collect from time to time, such as pro forma analysis, which is really the financial model that a developer does multiple times through a project to figure out whether it's going to meet their finance thresholds and earn money and those things. And so it really sets that kind of framework. And then also, I think quite importantly, is we've set some more parameters around how we will secure those obligations to make sure that if it's a promise coming out of a developer and out of staff's mouth at the time of development application, that it's secured and delivered in a timely sequence. So that was the policy that you reviewed last time, and we didn't receive significant council directed changes. So that's the policy we took forward to the community. And the developer comments that you see in the report have been grouped largely into themes. And I will say, having both written amenity policies and received these comments, and also having written these comments on behalf of other clients, there was nothing about this conversation we had with the development community that I found astounding or surprising. And so I'll just go through them very quickly, although they are very well written in the report. The first one is lack of certainty. And we did hear from several of the representatives of the development industry that they would like to know before they even acquire a piece of land what that obligation for amenities is going to be. So, you know, in one way, they like the development cost charge structure where there's no disputing that you have to pay this amount. It makes it easier to figure out and determine fair land values, and it also assists in early pro forma development. And we certainly appreciate that. And in an ideal world, and you know, with the review of the planning sections of the Local Government Act, there may be some changes pushing it in that direction. But for the time being, that's something that, you know, I don't believe we could come up with a policy that provides the level of certainty they would hope for, with the flexibility that we believe is truly needed to create equity in the development industry, to ensure that projects have a chance of succeeding should council wish to approve them. Because those two projects that are identical may be able to absorb the amenity contributions, but it would be challenging to absorb anything else that may benefit or be required for the project to proceed and benefit the rest of the community. And that includes even affordable housing. The second is the impact on affordability. And, this again is an industry-wide concern that, most municipalities are making significant efforts, including this one, to address the issue of affordable and attainable housing. Yet every municipality is also pushing limits on how far they can go with amenity contributions. And, they wanted to make very clear to us and to council that those amenity contributions do not get paid out of the developer profit. They would get passed on to the retail purchaser. So even though even a project that might secure some non-market housing, the market component of that project would need to be more expensive for it to meet pro forma numbers. And there's a whole host of arguments, and I don't believe this is the time or the forum to debate them, but I'm just reporting out what we've heard and some of the response to it. Equity and fairness, again, this is a principle that can be attained somewhat by rigidity and having fixed numbers. The approach we took, however, is really truly interested in ensuring that there's equity and fairness, and that we consider all of the things that a development may need to take into account financially to move forward. And by sharing information back and forth, including pro formas if necessary, we'd be in a good position to assess whether each development is being treated equitably and fairly, given all of the things that we have to consider and all of the costs and uncertainty they may bear. So, Mr. Mayor, those are kind of the four main themes that emerged, and staff did have some very good conversations with all of them. I think one other item that's not noted as clearly in the report, but is worth bearing some discussion quickly, is that when we wrote the policy, again, we're writing a policy to try and catch most development applications. The ones that will be a little bit different are the very large scale development applications. So, for example, something the scale of a Sunstone Ridge or a Benchlands or those type of applications, most amenity policies aren't really intended to address those ones. Those are so large and so big, there's a whole different system. Certainly all of the principles and elements in the policy will be applied, but we would expect a much more rigorous and colorful discussion around amenities and benefits and other contributions. And the developers, there's different tools that the municipality can use to fix in that certainty around what amenity charges they might face in future phases for a phased development. So, again, we were trying to provide as much certainty to as many projects as possible, but we did concede to several of the larger developers that their projects would go through some different iterations on the amenity side. And we talked about what that may look like, although nothing was determined. So just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the list that you've been provided, which is our second follow-up piece, that's being submitted, I think it's safe to say, Ms. Pedrini, in a very draft form, with the intent that that'll start feeding some discussion amongst council, whether this is considered more formally in a strategic planning session or a specific session dedicated to looking at amenities and how they may or may not relate to amenity contribution funds or large developments. That's perhaps a different discussion. But for the time being, Mr. Mayor, what we're requesting is that you approve the policy as presented to give staff and council and the development industry more of a framework around community amenity contributions. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your usual clear report. I'm going to suggest that we break our conversation into two parts. The first being the policy itself, and the second being the appended list of amenities. So maybe I'll just lead off with one question or a two-part question. I have a number of them, then I'll open it to council. But so with regards to fairness and the flexibility approach that you guys are putting forward, when you look at the community benefit side, just as an example, and this is why it's a two-part question, like what would be the metrics on that for staff to be able to measure the benefit to community? It's easier if somebody contributes X amount of dollars towards a pool, it's much more measurable. How do you measure on something like water lines and sewer lines and value to the community that way?
Mr. Mayor, through you, this is a very good question. And, having done it several times in several different contexts, determining what the cost of the benefit is pretty straightforward. Most of the things that fall in that benefits bucket are things that we have existing unit costs for or rates for. So we can, usually get a pretty good engineer's estimate from staff or from the developer's engineer about what it might cost to build storm sewer line 80 from here to here. And then from that, we apply a lot of the same sort of thinking that goes into things like latecomer charges. So if it's benefiting the developer 90%, but it happens to be helping out a couple of homes at the end of the street amounting to 10%, we would apply that sort of review to determine how much of that benefit should be considered tending towards the amenity side versus the requirement side. So it has worked quite successfully in the past using that general approach. And typically, I'm hard pressed. I'm trying to think of a benefit that didn't fall into that kind of service engineer hard cost sort of area.
Right. So with that in mind, the second part of the question is, again, the flexibility approach to achieve fairness and equality. That sounds like to me, there's a lot of, not gray area, but a lot of factors that come into play to make these determinations. And I'm wondering, with that flexibility approach, does that leave either the village or development staff who are making those sort of calculations somewhat exposed in terms of somebody coming back and going, well, this is an unfair approach. We get calls as politicians, it's costing me X amount to do this development over here, and it's too much, and the affordability bit, and understandable. So we get calls like that, and as part of the calls, there's often comment, and there can be comments about how staff have interpreted how they, questioning how staff has interpreted some of these values and therefore what they're being charged. So how can staff and the village be protected and developers be given some certainty with this approach?
Mr. Mayor, through you, the protection comes largely because amenities are largely, not exclusively anymore, but they're largely extra legal. They happen largely outside of any legislative framework, and they're always voluntary. So at the end of the day, at the end of the negotiation, what we would request from the developer is a letter volunteering the amenity package that we've agreed upon. And so at the end of the day, it's not a requirement that the village can impose. In my experience, I haven't seen a project ever fail on account of amenities in terms of an approval. I've seen them fail financially. And one comment I was remiss in not making earlier is that smaller markets like the village of Pemberton can be a little more fickle, and construction costs can rise sharply and steeply, and market demand can ebb and flow, and that's very common in most smaller municipalities. They're more sensitive, and what this also gives council the ability to do is to look at what the market condition is. So at the end of the day, we're applying so many different factors. I can't think, I don't really foresee an instance where the amenities will be the make or break on a project like this, like these typically. And the way we've set up the policy is if there's ever a concern of a developer that they feel the amenities are over the top and putting the project in jeopardy, we're more than open to receive that information and have it reviewed by people who can count way better than me to make sure that the amenities are calibrated and appropriate. And that said, Mr. Mayor, although we haven't committed to policy any stern percentage of lift or other metrics, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't use some of them as a baseline. So, we still could look at, a 30% take on lift or something like that as a framework to get started, but we didn't want to enshrine that in any policy at this stage. And like I said at the beginning, we do anticipate that over the next several years when the province, we know that the amenities is going to be the biggest piece of the review of the planning provisions that are still housed in the Local Government Act. It's many years overdue. And I've seen correspondence from the Urban Development Institute and the province in some of the earlier consultations that have really flagged amenities as the area of that act that needs to be addressed one way or the other. So I expect there'll be more clarity or certainty coming when the province completes that work. But at the end of the day, the ultimate decision, like any rezoning decision, is a discretionary one of council. The amenity appropriateness is similarly going to be discretionary at the discretion of council. And that should protect staff certainly, and the municipality from any liability or exposure.
And that's a good answer, and I tend towards this approach because I think it does lend itself to fairness and flexibility. But I do worry that there's the optic side of it. You know, that he paid this and she paid that, and I have to pay this, and it's a hard one to explain on the street. So I just want to make sure that that whole process is very clear and transparent. And
Understood.
I got a couple more, but I'm going to open it to council. Any questions? No further questions from council? Okay, I got another one. When you talk about the bigger developments being outside the policy, or would be worked outside of the policy, so what does govern, or not govern that, but sort of help dictate that process with the bigger developers if it's not within this policy?
Mr. Mayor, through you, as I was saying those words, I realized that I probably didn't frame what I intended to say as well as I could have. They will be bigger than this policy is largely the response. So as we go through large master plans, one of the things that will always come forward from the developer are the things that they're looking at contributing to the community. And, you know, we look at some of the larger ones in recent examples. You know, Sunstone has certainly delivered in a form a little bit different than you would expect from a smaller developer, a very significant amenity for the community. And, you know, that was done through a combination of what really is a comprehensive development zone tool. It was done by establishing an amenity, backing out the cost of that ultimate amenity to make sure that it's paid through the phases. So really what I intended to say, although I didn't, is that, you know, the structures will become on one hand a little bit more complex in determining them, but a little bit simpler to administer, because we know that we will be, you know, likely dealing with bigger ticket items that are a little bit easier to define. In my experience, quite honestly, the bigger projects are a little bit easier, although the dollars are bigger, they're a little bit easier to figure out because you can actually start talking about real projects and real deliverables, and they have a certain capacity to do things that smaller projects can't do on their own. So
there's still sort of that negotiation is still directed by the wish list that we're going to talk about by this policy at a higher level. It's just a different negotiation. Okay. Any other questions on the actual policy before we get into the appended list? Okay, let's talk about the list and then we'll go into the resolutions at the end. What page is the list on?
Can I make a comment before we get necessarily to the list?
Yeah.
We weren't wanting to necessarily go through the list at this point.
Oh, you weren't?
No. So we need to have another session on this particular list. This was just contrived from a variety of different documents, and we'll need to actually, they're not in any order of priority. There's no values. There's no whether we're going to be looking at grant funding to also assist in this. So there needs to be more of a strategy around defining, if council still agrees to all of the amenities in this list, how we would fund them, whether they are something we're looking to the development community or we're going to be tackling on our own.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, there's a lot more information to help prioritize that. Councillor Zant.
I just wanted to make one comment on the list. Seeing a lot of the items on there, I thought that would it be worthwhile bringing that back to the MTF as well to make a contribution to that list. I know on our in our meetings we talked about how important a reuse it center would be. I'm not sure if that was in there somewhere, but I think the MTF would also have some good input into this as well.
I think we did talk about looking at a recreation master plan once we were done the OCP. That was one of the items that came up as part of our strategic planning. And we have talked about it for a while, especially with our new recreation manager. I don't know if we necessarily want to wait that long to get a complete comprehensive. I think we can do some interim steps while we wait to get to that point, because a lot's happening on the rec site. And I think it is a valuable conversation for council to have. But I think we also need more than just one particular group to maybe comment on some of these things. And I think we haven't had an opportunity necessarily to even look at it from a staff perspective on how we feel that we should be bringing this forward. But we said we would bring a list forward. It had some of these that had been identified in the committee of the whole report that we talked about. So it was for council's information, knowing that it needed more work.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chalmers?
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to add at a staff level, the official community plan review, which has been deferred, but I understand is still pending, is a great opportunity for council to get some additional information and some additional ideas on what the community might benefit from. So, there's no harm in having an interim list until that work is completed, but I would suspect through that and council strategic planning work that you could prioritize a fairly healthy list based on what you see so far.
Okay, with that in mind, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the Village of Pemberton Community Amenity Contribution Policy?
I'll make the motion.
A second.
Seconded by Councillor Noble. Any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chalmers, Ms. Pedrini.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We have no bylaws, so that takes me to the mayor's report. There's another notebook. So I guess an official welcome back to everybody. I hope everybody had a good month of August. It was obviously pretty busy in town. Lots of folks from the Lower Mainland rediscovering Pemberton. I can't believe how many people I spoke to over the last month or so that live within a 2-hour radius from us or distance from us and have never been to Pemberton or haven't been since they were 6 or stories like that over and over. And yeah, it's been really interesting and it's been a lot to manage. Hopefully businesses have had the opportunity to profit a little bit. A lot of uncertainty going into the fall and the winter, but it's been a busy summer on the roads as well, as we discussed earlier. From a meeting standpoint, I've had some update meetings with the MLA, MP, with mayors of the corridor. I actually have a meeting with Mayor Squamish and Whistler on a week from today, I believe. And as well as with Chief Dean from Leewat. The Mayor's Task Force meetings as discussed, and a regional district meeting last week. And so I'll just go over that pretty quickly. A couple quick items. Director Mack, through his many different funds, has put $1,500 towards the Divine Transfer Station to do a bunch of tire removal there, which is a good environmental move, as well as $20,000 to support the grant application for the museum to move for the school cabin project. They want to move the old schoolhouse from the outdoor school way up the valley and bring it onto the museum site. So he supported that application as well with some funds. We had a presentation, a delegation on a report called it's the Pemberton Valley Agricultural Land Use Inventory. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's an inventory of crops, livestock, facilities, processing facilities, and especially land use, agricultural land use in the area. It's a report that's really helpful for mapping, and the GIS data is also good for the policy making and planning. It's an interesting report. I could send it on to you guys, or it's on the SLRD website. There's a bunch of different results, and I won't go into all of them here, but a couple of them that jumped out at me were the fact that our land use or land availability has remained very consistent. So the agrologist was quite pleased with our area in that sense. What's either available for, we've seen a little bit of decrease in the inventory for some of the smaller parcels that have been developed, but for the most part, a very large percentage of the available agricultural land and the land being used has remained very consistent. So that's good news. That means we're protecting our agricultural land as we've set out to do at the village and at the SLRD. A couple interesting numbers. And sorry, this is referencing 2009 to 2019. So there's a 10-year gap here. And in that time, the production of potatoes has gone down significantly, which is really interesting. But there's been a huge increase in smaller, more intensive production, like everything from veggies to berries, etc. And small scale livestock. There's still no large intensive livestock, but a fair increase in small livestock. So interesting to see those trends. And as part of it, they did an agricultural water demand model. How much water do we need? How much water are we going to need as a valley to continue this level of agriculture? Unfortunately, it didn't come with a portion that projected where we can get it from. So it didn't take into account the rivers and some of the irrigation coming off the hills, but very interesting report. It's on the website if you'd like to see it. 8.1 was regarding the Whistler Olympic Park. I've reported on this a number of times about the 26 campsites that are being proposed, some walk-in, some RV. And there was a public hearing, and after the public hearing, or during and after, there was a sort of a big cry about access to Madeley Lake Park, which is in the same area, and it's being tied to this application. And so there was a request of staff, should it be tied? Does this change things at all? Because basically everything else that was given first reading that went to this public hearing, so for instance, the wildlife and grizzly concerns, that's all in the wildlife protection plan. That's in, that's all in there. A number of those issues, some environmental issues have been looked at, but the access was not discussed by the board previously. So there's been a request to find out from staff, or staff to find out what the rationale is behind closing this road down and the access to this park, whether there's environmental or conservation reasons or what it is, before we proceed. So third reading was deferred for that reason on that application. So that one carries on. Of interest, there was a Crown land application approved by the board, and this is for a parcel of land that's adjacent to the park in Seaton Portage. So for those of you who've been down at that area, there's a nice park at the end of the lake there that they'd like to attach to. So hopefully that goes. And there was a request to get quotes to find out how much it would be to evaluate or to give a value to building the trail from Lions Bay to Squamish, the Sea to Sky Trail, and carrying that on there. So a quote has been asked for, and a budget discussion will ensue. And then probably the biggest item on that agenda was the Wedgwood rezoning. And we've talked about this one in the past as well, and it was a tough, long conversation. So just a quick recap, Wedgwood has 6 phases of development that they've been moving up along. Phase 1 is closest to the road and moves into the hillside with each phase. So what was brought forward for first reading was an application to have a phase 7 with 12 new strata lots, similar to the ones that are already being built on, once again, further up the hillside. And then in addition to that application, or as part of the application, there would be 52 townhouses or apartments on the west side of the highway. So if you're driving to Pemberton on the left side of the highway where there is no development, they were proposing 52 townhouse apartments, as well as the 12 strata lots on the other side. There was discussion around, so that 36 of the units would be covenanted. The hope would be that it would be affordable for employees. There would be, so let me just check my notes, 16 rental units owned by Yukon Investments, that's the development group. Those rental units would be divided by communities. So Whistler, Pemberton, and Area C would have access to about a third, just shy of a third of each, because some of them would be kept for the development group for their employees. And the other 36 would be covenanted 3-bedroom units. So I give more detail on the application. I've spoken to it a number of times. As part of the amenity that they were offering as part of this application was, there's on the west side of the road, there's 120 acres that are, or hectares, sorry, that are zoned resource. And as part of the application, they would donate that to the regional district for park, or not too sure what, but that would be part of it. And it's currently zoned resource. It's not zoned for development as it is. So that's really the nuts, the high level of the application. the discussion that ensued was really difficult because nobody at, I don't think any of our tables wants to turn away from any affordable employee housing opportunities at this point. You know, there's a lot of work being done up and down the valleys, from Naquatco right to Squamish and beyond in terms of affordable housing, but it's still not enough. There's still a housing crisis and affordability crisis as far as I'm concerned around here. And it's something that we're working at, as we know, with our policies. But so nobody at that table either wanted to be part of turning it down, but there was a lot of discussion about how appropriate this type of development is where it's being proposed. So the conversation was centered around the fact that you'd have 52 townhouses. There's no commercial in the area. So everything, whether it's a liter of milk or going to work or kids to school, everything is car dependent. Part of the proposal story was for 2 car share electric cars. And that was a limited, it was funded, I have to look through my notes, that was funded for a couple of years. And then after that, the Strata would have to take it over, funded by the developer. The first 2 years, I think, I'd have to check. In terms of transit and there was nothing beyond bus sheds and layaways. There was nothing really to support transit. You know, there was discussion on the fact that we have limited buses coming from Pemberton, and when they leave Pemberton, especially in the morning, they're generally full, if not over capacity. So, you know, there doesn't seem to be any transit options proposed within this application. There was no proposal for safety issues. If you do have a bus or you're crossing from one side of the highway to the other on the uphill on Highway 99, there was no real proposals for that in the application. And again, the discussion at the table was it is a very car dependent community, and it goes away from the RGS, the work that's been done on the RGS, which is about preventing highway sprawl, which is about densification in existing communities as opposed to sprawl. It's about compact communities, and this development was felt by many of the board members was none of those. It's not compact, it's not self-sufficient, there's no commercial, there's no jobs, there's no school, there's no fire hall. And so for employee housing, there's no walkability to any service. You can't walk to the community center, the grocery store, or to work, that's for sure. So those were the concerns that went around. Again, everybody was reluctant, you know, because there was some really good aspects to this application in terms of providing some much needed employee housing. You know, the hope is that we can keep working with the developer to see if there's other options to somehow make this happen and look at the 12 lot. There was actually more appetite, by the way, around the table to consider the 12 lot strata, the 12 strata lot increase, the phase 7, rather than sprawling up onto the west side of the road. So there was discussion of, you know, is there a way to work with the developer and provide that rezoning for some sort of other contribution towards employee housing, if not on that exact site? How would that look? How could that be? So it went around and eventually first reading failed. So it's not going to public hearing. And again, staff is aware that everybody on the board was very willing to consider looking at options for affordable housing, you know, working with this developer. But it did fail. Most people felt that it was not the right, it was the right project in the wrong place. It was in the middle of the woods and it didn't make sense from safety to sprawl. So that was the biggest conversation that day. What else do I have to report? Let me just grab an email here.
Mayor Richmond?
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Antonelli just has a question for you.
Sure, go ahead. Sorry, I had my head down.
Right, just to comment on that. I want to say thank you for the update on that. And yeah, I just encourage you to stay the course of the RGS policies. You know, you summarized them already, and I really support the RGS. A lot of consultation went into that, and you know, the Wedgwoods proposal, it has some admirable qualities, but ultimately the RGS, I think it cost $1 million to pull the whole thing together, and we need to really support those policies.
I would agree. Thank you for the support, because it was a tough discussion. couple other events that happened through the summer, the Airthon, or through August, the Airthon pulled off. There's been a couple of nice community events. The Arts Council put on a nice art walk. So community groups are managing to find some activities for our community to keep community spirit up, which is really great. I want to get to a letter of support in a second, but maybe a couple quick community announcements. I do want to recognize the forestry and the wildfire firefighters and their quick response. It's been about an 8 or probably about a 12-day period now where they've been working nonstop. We've all heard the helicopters, and they did a great job. I think we had at least 5 fires in the region from that lightning storm. So just a shout out to those men and women who've been working their butts off, and they did a great job. On that line, our thoughts go out to the families who lost their homes in the Cottonwood Court fire. That was a tragedy for sure. I know the community's rallied around the families, but if they need anything, their community is there, and our thoughts definitely go out there. I also do want to respond to or shout out to our firefighting, Pemberton Fire and Rescue. They responded really quickly to a difficult spot. That fire was in a difficult spot, and they responded very quickly and very professionally. I've had a number of comments about that. And just in general, the Pemberton Fire and Rescue has been run off their feet for the summer, whether it's highway incidents or fires. So just a thank you to them for their dedication. And a follow-up to that, they are currently recruiting. It's very fulfilling. So they are recruiting for our volunteer on-call volunteer firefighters as we speak. Also, school's back, so the usual reminder of the 30 zone, but I just sort of want to identify, talking to a number of parents, return to school is making a lot of people anxious. There's families that are not sure whether they should send their kids back. They live in multi-generational homes. They're worried about their kids bringing something back from school. It's definitely something that we're going to be talking about more at the Mayor's Task Force, and it's just something I want to talk about here because I think it's a source of stress for many of our community members, people trying to figure out working from home, not working from home, but the going back to school and how that's going to work and how safe is everyone going to be. It's a source of anxiety right now, and I just want to acknowledge it and say that it's something that we need to work on as a community as we roll into the fall here. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I don't know if you all had the opportunity to see the email I sent quickly before the meeting. I had a letter of request, and I'm just going to bring it up, or I had a request from Vernon Sylvia Schnoss. You folks met them. They presented to us months back at our council meeting. Where is it? There it is. And their Going Full Circle group has applied to the provincial government for, within the Indigenous Climate Health Action Program, they've applied for some funds for their Going Full Circle program, where they bring together all walks in ceremonies and talking circles and sweats, and it's to develop long-term strategy to reduce the impacts of climate change, etc. And this is from Shamakum, from Lower Statliam. So they've requested a letter of support from us for this application. So I don't know if you'd like more detail on that, or if somebody would like to make a motion to supply that letter of support.
I'll make the motion to supply it.
Councillor Noble, second. Second, Councillor Antonelli, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. And that is it for my report. Any council reports? Councillor Craddock?
Yeah, actually, I had a report, but Mr. Clark provided such a good update on the Daking District that I'll use his report as mine, and that's all we had going. Thank you. I thought he did a great job. Am
I still on mute? Yeah, I think he did a really good job. He was really clear about it, and I meant when I said I feel like there's a new level of cooperation there. That's really fun. I think it's going to be really beneficial. Any other council reports?
I think you guys really stole our thunder.
Come on, we use that excuse all the time. Councillor Zant? Councillor Zant?
Yes, I just wanted to, I also want to make a shout out to the Pemberton Fire Department. Their response to the Cottonwood fire was absolutely amazing. And I know all of the residents here can't say thank you enough. Thank you is unfortunately not good enough words for it. Also want to make a shout out to just the village of Pemberton and the people here. Their support for the people that have been, can't live in their homes now has been amazing, with donations of whether it's food, clothing, or just cash. It's been absolutely outstanding. So big shout out to the fire department, the locals, and the wildfire crews that have worked in the area for the last couple months. As you said, I know they're putting in a lot of long hours, but there's a lot of people that are really happy with the work they're doing. And as far as committees are concerned, the cemetery has been doing some work on the cemetery this summer. I believe their parking lot is finished, and last Saturday I believe they had a working bee to start putting the fence in.
Oh, good.
Taking a drive down there, take a look and look at the updates.
Nice.
And that's it. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, moving on. Correspondence for action. Maya McCloskey on behalf of Pemberton District Chamber of Commerce. Council's looking for a little direction with this. So I think I reported on it. Myself, the CAO, and Ms. Brooksbank had a meeting with Maya on daycare a while back, and there's a desire to collaborate somehow to advocate and find ways to provide more daycare. We all know it's ridiculously unavailable in our community. So, and it's been frustrating because I haven't known how to get back to Maya to say we're going to do the following. And I think it's something that we're really trying to work out at the task force as well. I think the way the task force will look at this is a way of just sort of tying in the work that has been done already and seeing how we can collaborate as a community to really strongly advocate for whatever we need, from the chamber. We saw what the chamber is putting forward, to community groups, to parents, to the village. So I know there's going to be a conversation at the mayor's task force, but it's been frustrating because I want to give Maya more, but I haven't been able to. Ms. Gilmore.
One of the things we've been talking about on a staff level, and you've actually brought this up as well, is sort of having another opportunity to review the childcare needs assessment that was done, just to see where we can, are there steps that we're able to advocate? I mean, advocacy is typically one of the things we are able to do, and we did actually put forward a request to UBCM to talk about this particular item. We still haven't heard back, by the way, from any of the ministries if we've received our meetings yet. But we feel from our perspective, just making sure that that document stays live. I know Whistler and Squamish are sort of taking some other, I think Whistler's completed some of the work on next steps. But that's something we will be bringing forward most likely in October, I would say. We've talked about that.
Okay, that'd be great. I'd still like to get back to how do we respond to McCloskey? I'd like her to know that we are working on it.
Well, she's an attendee today, so she's going to hear the conversation.
Good.
But I agree. I think until we hear what the province can help us with, I think there was something, I mean, from what the chamber had submitted from the attachment, there was some good wording there that we could, hit home when we hopefully get our meeting, if not sending letters of advocacy. They're talking about encouraging a BC government to work with provinces, regulating bodies to standardize certification criteria, enhance online early childhood education training programs, financial support for ECE training for Indigenous peoples across BC, financial assistance to offset provincial portion of property taxes for eligible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are some things I think when we can advocate together collectively as a group, our voice is going to be heard that much more. So I think maybe making some of those, if council's agreeable to some of those recommendations.
Remind me when our next council meeting is?
September 15th.
So that's before our potential ministers meeting, right?
Yes.
I know it's a jammed agenda, but can we even just for reference bring back the child care report, just because some of that wording and some of that advocacy there would be nice to review prior to the ministers meeting.
Do you
So-
want us to circulate it, or do you want it to be on a committee of the whole, or how do you want to deal with that?
Do we have a committee of the whole book for next meeting?
We do, and as it happens, MLA Sturdy will be a delegation.
Okay, let's put it on committee of the whole then, please.
Okay.
And even if it's just for just a quick review together to refresh ourselves on some of those action items, as well as to help review before I mention. And just in terms of, like I told, just since we have attendees, I think we're all on board, recognize the importance of attacking this as a community. So I'm happy to partner with the chamber and other groups. Again, this is going to be discussed probably at fair length on September 10th, which is our Mayor's Task Force meeting. And I'm pretty sure some of the results of that will be to reach out to people like yourselves to figure out how we can unite and conquer. So I know it's been a while, and I appreciate your push, and we appreciate the letter. We're almost there. Stay tuned. Do we need? I mean, let's put an official response anyway, even though Ms. McCloskey is on the Zoom right now.
Do you want a resolution?
Yeah. A motion.
That the child care needs assessment will be put on the committee of the whole, and that chamber be advised.
Yeah.
There'll be a conversation on the 15th.
And then we'll circle back after that. Yes. So can I get that motion, please?
I'll move that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Zant. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 items for information. Did anyone want to pull anything out?
Can I make a comment on one of them before we, or do you want to pull it out?
Let's pull it out to make a comment.
Okay, the Patrick Wheeler
Okay.
Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program.
So Councillor Zant's going to pull that one.
Mhm.
Motion to receive 1, 2, and 4. Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.
I just wanted council to know that we are preparing several grant applications for the funding streams that are coming down. In fact, we're applying for 3 under 3 different streams. So we're going to reapply for the Park and Ride, which is 100% funding. We're adding a few different features to it. We did do a debrief or a little follow-up on what we could strengthen as far as the grant application, because we were not successful on the last one. So we just have a few changes. We're going to add a bathroom and a change room. And we're going to upgrade our fast charger, or the EV chargers, electric car chargers, to fast ones, and look at we're trying to use as many documents as we have. So our cycling network plan had a recommendation to add some lockable storage units for people who have bikes, so that if they're taking transit and there's no room, because I think transit can hold only 2 bikes at the front, that they could lock it up there. So this is in addition to trails and landscaping and lighting, garbage receptacles, but bear proof. All of those things are already there, but they asked us to enhance it a little bit. So that's what we're working on right now. All of these grant applications will be coming forward in October. They're due actually one may be on the 15th, because I believe they start being due October 1st. And then I think 22nd is the next one. So that's for one grant application. The second one is for recreation, and we're working with PORCA right now to come up with some costing and to go ahead and proceed with Bike Skills Park on the rec site. So we'd like to be bringing that forward for a resolution from council on the, I want to say the 15th, the 13th. Is that our one in October, first one, Sheena? Or is it the 6th?
October 6th.
Okay, so we'll probably be bringing it on the 20th then.
20th.
And that one is the weird, it's 70, I think 27% is what our share, 27.33% or something odd. So we're working, PORCA's already received $25,000 from Whistler Blackcomb Foundation. And then it just depends on what that final dollar value comes out at. So, and then the third one is, there's a COVID sort of stream, and we're looking at applying for the community garden portion of lot 13, which joins the Park and Ride. And we're looking at if we're able to pull something together. It's quite ambitious for those 3 grants. There's a lot of information to put forward, but those are what we're hoping to apply for under these streams.
Awesome. Exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Just-
Councillor Noble and Councillor Craddock.
Just one question about the park and ride. Is it still inclusive of the community garden boxes?
Well, that's where I was saying the community garden boxes will be part of the COVID application stream, because there's 3 streams to apply on. It doesn't fit in with, we'd never actually applied for it on the last grant because it doesn't fit. We had to pick one. So we've moved ahead, like we have all the details and drawings and information for the park and ride part. So it's like a 2-parter, but throughout the end of October, we should have applications for the whole lot.
So it's put on a different application, but it's still in the plans.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Craddock.
Yeah, I guess my question was similar in point is we have that property on the end of Harrow Road. I think it's lot 18 and lot 20. And we had talked a lot of times about doing some agriculture on that site and also putting a trail in to connect Fraser Road. Are they not part of a potential application for granting?
They aren't at this point. Council gave us a prioritization of those ag parks, and lot 13 was the one that we were to pursue first. So we've done all the design work and the surveying on that particular one. So we had a shelf ready projects for them. So that's why we're applying for those ones. And then we would move to the Harrow Road lot. And then if council is still wanting to move ahead, actually we've done some agriculture work at the airport just by way of haying, but nothing more. So that was the order, the sequence of priority.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, can somebody move receipt for correspondence item number 3? Councillor Zant, second by Councillor Craddock, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business, notice of motion. And question period. So for those in attendance who wish to ask a question, please click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls. This will notify village staff that you would like to ask a question. Village staff will announce your name when it's your turn and you will be prompted to unmute your microphone. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to business discussed during the council meeting are permitted. Ellie, do we have any takers?
Don't see any hands up.
Give it a sec in case somebody's searching. Was media, is Mr. Falloon on this evening?
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
don't see anything.
Well, if there's no questions, then I'll look for a motion to go back in camera.
Moved.
Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Noble, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. Well, let's